Kate Milafalcha. Welcome to Irish Granny Helen. If I have calculated this right, it is the anniversary of the moon landing when the first Earthling took a step on the moon, our satellite. I've been thinking a lot about the moon lately. I think a lot of people have been thinking about the moon lately. Here's a little clue. Ask yourself, how many people do you know, or just that you've encountered casually, who have a dog or a cat or a child named Luna? I don't think that's okay. I believe in synchronicities, and when these sorts of things become just that inundate the zeitgeist, ask yourself, what is the reason for that? Influence of the moon. Also, we seem to have our fair share of lunatics these days. But I digress already, and I just started. So welcome, everybody. Thank you for watching. Thank you for joining me. I hope you'll enjoy this. I appreciate subscribers, so hit the subscribe button. I appreciate returning subscribers, and if you're new, buckle up. Here we go. We're going to talk about the moon and space travel, just touching on the edges of all of it. So this is the anniversary of Apollo 11 landing on the moon. So why'd they call it Apollo 11? I always find it fascinating that these hardcore scientists who work in aerospace name everything after mythological characters. It's very interesting. So Apollo is the god of the sun, of light, of the sun, mind you. This is a mission to the moon. I thought that was interesting. They couldn't name it after the goddess of the moon, could they? So, god of sun, god of light, god of poetry, god of healing and medicine, god of prophecy, and god of archery. Maybe that was the clue. They wanted to be sure that they aimed correctly. I don't know. He was the son of Zeus, and his twin sister was Artemis, also known as Diana, goddess of the hunt. So the Russians, the USSR, in 1957 let off I believe it was a satellite, Sputnik. I vaguely remember. I remember the angst around it, and it was classified in my resources as a panic, so it must have been pretty bad. People were worried. American official people were worried that USSR would take over space and then, be over literally all of us. That they had more superior technology, more superior military capabilities, and this was the Cold War. So Eisenhower formed NASA, which began the space race. I don't think we should ignore the fact that the first head of NASA was Werner von Braun, brought to the United States after the war, World War II, from Germany. And he was an SS member. I've seen pictures of him standing next to higher officials in his SS uniform. This is not conspiracy theory. This has been documented. So they began the NASA project with Project Mercury. Here we go again with the gods. And the goal was to put a human in Earth orbit. That was step number one. On April 12th of 1961, the Russians did it first with Yuri Gagarin. And on May 5th of 61, so just a few weeks later, Alan Shepard went into suborbit for 15 minutes. So Kennedy was now president, and he decided to define the race by aiming for a feat that would require such new technology that the Russians didn't already have a head start. Let's go for something so new and not thought of yet that they're starting at the same 0 point that we are right now. And something that would require unused, uninvented new technology, better rockets. Let's level the playing field. So the goal, of course, was to reach the moon. And Kennedy made this very famous speech. It was quite an inspirational speech, but I just took a little tiny bit out of it. I'm sure it'll sound familiar to you. Well, if you're old enough, it will. Quote, "We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things." He's referring to earlier references in the speech where he talked about climbing the highest mountains and when they first flew across the Atlantic. He's making reference to that. So we choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they're hard. A novel concept this day where we're always looking for a quick, fast, easy. He faced opposition. People, scientists, big shot scientists at MIT told him this is ridiculous. They called it a moondoggle. So JFK he reached out to the USSR. He said, let's do this together. Let's make this a joint effort. And Khrushchev said no. So he tried again. He went to the UN and said, let's make this a United Nations effort. And they said no. Now, I did not dig deeply enough to figure out why did he do that. Was this really reaching across the aisles, extending a hand of international cooperation and friendship? We all want to think that. We all prefer to think that. Was there a financial motivation? Would it have been just easier to get help financially? I don't know. I don't know what it was about. Nevertheless, he did do that. And it was a risk to take. It would not have been popular at the time, very conservative time as far as the Cold War and Russia. NASA created Project Gemini. And, they did incremental steps towards achieving the goal. They didn't just get on the spaceship and turn the key and fly to the moon. They did little steps one at a time to work out the kinks and figure out what was safe and what wasn't safe. So eventually they were ready, and there's a whole long narrative of how the project went, and I chose to, in the interest of time, I'm skipping over a lot of it. There were tragedies along the way, failures along the way, but eventually they felt they were ready. And they had what do they call it? Not a team, a crew of astronauts, 3 astronauts in the Apollo missions per mission. So Neil Armstrong, Michael Collins, and Buzz Aldrin. And how it worked, how did they get chosen? Were they special? I'm sure there was consideration, personalities, and experience, performance under pressure. But the astronauts were rotated in the whole entire program. They were rotated for assignments. And when your number came up, that was the mission you went on. And it wasn't technically, theoretically. There were no other considerations. I wonder about that. But the crew for the Apollo 11, they were just the next guys up. So Jim Lovell was out of rotation. He should have been up because he had back surgery and he lost his place in the rotation, or he would have been on this trip. And lucky him, he got the command of Apollo 13. That's a whole other video. It's actually a full-length movie. They describe themselves. Now, there is, at the time, there was a lot of fascination on the public about these teams of astronauts and how did they get along, and the gossip around the interpersonal relationships. And it's true that interpersonal dynamics do come into play in those situations. You can be sure they were very careful about that. Um, this group, this trio they were described as amiable strangers. They got along well. They worked well together in a working relationship, but outside of the capsule, they weren't close pals. And this is unlike some other crews before and after who were actually jolly friends. They were teasing each other and uh, had a different degree of comfort with each other, even during the mission. But these three guys worked really well together, which was lucky, I guess. I thought this was interesting. They have patches that they wear on their uniforms. And each mission, which like Gemini 1, Apollo 3, each mission has its own particular patch, kind of like Girl Scout patches. This one showed an eagle descending onto the moon with an olive branch, and very symbolic. They came in peace. The name of the lunar module that landed was the Eagle. Armstrong brought with him a little souvenir to take with him for posterity. He brought a piece of wood from the Wright brothers' 1903 Wright Flyer airplane and a little bit of fabric from its wing. Interesting. And how did they decide who was going to be the first person to step out? How did Neil Armstrong draw that straw? He said it was not based on personal individual desire. I think that they were closely observed coming up to the moment before they, took off. Armstrong was announced for it on April 14th of 1969. So on the day of the liftoff, I don't have my astronaut terminology. Over 1 million people watched the launch from the vicinity of the site. So there were hotels that were booked for months in advance because people depended that it was going to happen on the date it was going to happen, and they got hotels so that they could physically be there. Even if it was from a distance, they could watch this thing take off, because this was, imagine telling this to your great-grandchildren. There were 3,500 representatives of the media available there. Other viewers who got ringside seats were Chief of Staff, Army General, I guess, Westmoreland, 4 cabinet members, 19 governors, 40 mayors, and 60 ambassadors. I thought that was interesting. There were 200 members of Congress, and LBJ and his wife were there. Vice President Agnew was there. Nixon watched it from the White House. It was televised in over 33 countries, and this was a long time ago, and even getting television coverage from another country was a big, gigantic deal. There were 25 million viewers in the United States. Think about some of the famous people on YouTube and social media who have almost that many or over that many viewers. Times have changed. There were millions of people who listened to it on the radio. On July 20th, Aldrin and Armstrong got into the Eagle from the main ship called Columbia, which is symbolic in many ways. Columbia refers to the United States. So the spot where they decided to land, it was all calculated out, but they didn't land exactly where they had aimed for. They were a tiny bit off. Part of it had to do with debris that they were trying to avoid. So they landed at what was called Tranquility Base. And when the Eagle set down, the famous sentence, "The Eagle has landed," They were very circumspect about what was said and done for public consumption around all of this. For example, there was a lawsuit against NASA going on at the moment because Madalyn Murray O'Hair, the most hated woman in America because she was an atheist, which just is kind of astounding. She was a little abrasive in her personality. She has sued NASA. They were fighting in court because there was religious talk, specifically Christian religious talk, during the Apollo 8 flight. And they were being careful. But Buzz Aldrin, had actually prepared religiously for this. He had a private communion ceremony with himself that his pastor had set up for him. So the first communion on the moon, the type of thing. So Armstrong, so there's the two of them in the module, but only one is going to get, did they both get out? I don't remember. Armstrong descended to the moon's surface. This was filmed, but it was poor quality film, and people like to talk about, oh, it was faked. What's his name? The movie guy who made one of my favorite movies, Paths of Glory. Kubrick faked it in a soundstage or something. But what the official story is that this was filmed using slow scan television, because that's what they had that worked in that environment. But it wasn't compatible with broadcasting on television. They just didn't go together. So what they did is they took the video, I'm going to use the terminology video, whether it's correct or not. They took this video that Neil Armstrong was recording, and they put it on a screen in, I don't know, NASA, I don't know, and pointed a TV camera at it, and they filmed the screen showing the film that Neil Armstrong was making. So it was displayed on this monitor, and a TV camera filmed it as it was displayed on the monitor. It was a broadcast of a broadcast. So yeah, it was low quality. Oh, significantly reduced the picture quality is how it's said. 600 million people watched this. I remember this day. This was a big deal. And when he put his foot down off the ladder onto the moon's surface, he said, so this is interesting. This is the quote of what we heard. "One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." Now, he was supposed to say one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind. And that was known that was what it was supposed to be. And it's not what we heard. And so for a long time, the narrative was there was a disruption in the communication, the sound. Armstrong, he later admitted he forgot to say one small step for a man. He left the A out. Aldrin described what he saw as a magnificent desolation. NASA had, this is interesting / creepy. NASA had prepared a speech by William Safire, who was one of the president's speechwriters, called "In the Event of Moon Disaster," and they designed a protocol. What would happen if these guys, there was a tragedy and they died, and this was a huge, gigantic, publicly unfolding failure that would have been so traumatic? What would they do? They would shut down communication. They would have clergy people available, and they would have a ritual, like a kind of like an immediate memorial type of thing, where they would commend their souls to the deepest of the deep, like a burial at sea. They had all this planned, a contingency plan. But everything went fine, and they came home, and Neil Armstrong was lauded for the rest of his life. And you have to wonder how low your adrenaline stores are that you would be willing to take that risk. I mean, you'd have to, you could not convince me to get in a sailboat. So I'm pretty impressed. And I think, the world will never forget what Neil Armstrong did. But let's talk a little bit about the moon, since that's supposed to be what we're talking about on this anniversary of the moon landing. The moon's our only natural satellite. It influences our tides, it influences our hormones. It orbits us once every 29.5 days. How was it formed? Nobody knows for sure, but what they think is there was a big impact between the Earth and a large space object. And this was very early in the formation of the solar system, and the moon is a chunk that got left. And it got pulled into our orbit. It's a quarter of the diameter of the Earth, and it has 1/6 of our gravitational pull. So I looked up the word moon, because you know how I love to do that. And the word moon actually comes from Old English. And you know how words change with time and location and usage. So how do we get moon from Old English? Well, they use the word menses for the word for month, and moon came from that. Then we have the Latin luna, which I was kidding about earlier, and the Greek Selene. Now, Selene, Luna and Selene were goddesses. Selene was also known as Artemis, Diana. Maybe that's why they use the word Apollo, because they were going to Artemis, the moon. The moon phases have been recognized since, ancient times. They're depicted in very, very early prehistoric cave paintings, the different stages of the moon. One of the earliest discovered depictions actually comes from Ireland, 3000 BCE. Okay, so the oldest known astronomer is, I'm going to try to say this, Enheduanna, the daughter of Sargon. She was a poet. I mean, this is a real life person now, not a goddess, a real life person. She was a poet, an astronomer, and a high priestess to the moon. The moon was used to keep track of the passage of time in ancient times. And different cultures used it differently. I think we all know that Native American tribes would have, and I'm just pulling terminology out of my head from what I've read a long time ago. So I'm not saying this is correct, but it's kind of an example. They'd have like the winter moon, or the harvest moon, that kind of thing. In that time period, those events would happen. Let's see here. The ancient use of the phases of the moon to mark the passage of time eventually gave rise to the lunar calendar of Islam in the 7th century, and then morphed into our, other cultures using it. Celebrations of the full moon are big. For example, the Harvest Moon Festival, the Chinese Lunar New Year. The moon's been considered a spirit, a deity. It's part of numerous cosmologies. It's associated in alchemy with silver. I didn't know that. Then there's this interesting phenomenon, psychological phenomenon, called the overview effect. This is a cognitive shift when viewing Earth from space. Very recently, I don't even remember what the purpose was of the event. I saw a former astronaut, Harvard graduate, doctor, medical doctor, give a speech at Harvard. And like I said, I can't remember the occasion, but he was in his little, astronaut uniform. And he talked about this overview effect. So this is when you go up into outer space and you look out the window and you look and you see the Earth far, far, far away. It actually creates some sort of psychological dissonance, or it's a phenomenon that you realize, oh God, the Earth is really inconsequential in the larger scheme of things. And it gives you a new perspective, literally and figuratively. It's a state of awe. It has self-transcendent qualities. It causes overwhelming emotional feelings and sense of connection to the people and the Earth as a whole. You realize, we're all in this little blue ball together. It is usually transformative, and often when people return from space travel and they've experienced this phenomenon, they undergo psychological counseling for it. It's really a paradigm shift in their sense of reality. Then there's a thing called moon joy. And this is a feeling of intense happiness and excitement that only comes from a mission to the moon. So I guess most of us will never experience that kind of joy. It's a living proof that we're a fragile planet, and our purpose is to find joy in lifting each other up by creating solutions and not by destroying things. Let's talk about lunacy, coming from the Latin luna, for the moon, the goddess of the moon. Lunacy is officially a condition caused by being moonstruck. This is old reference. Comes from the Latin word taken from luna, lunaticus, and it was actually a thing. It was actually an identifiable situation in the olden days. If you had symptoms of epilepsy or madness, they ascribed that to the moon, the effects of the moon, and that's why they called it lunaticus. But later on, as time went by, other neurological and psychiatric conditions were put under that label. Thus, lunatic asylums, that's where that all comes from. The ancients thought that these issues were caused by the full moon, but they also thought the full moon caused fever, rheumatism, and other actual physical diseases. Not my words, YouTube. These are ancient beliefs. In 2012, Obama passed the 21st Century Language Act, in which people are officially not supposed to say lunatic. They're supposed to say people of unsound mind, or the Latin, which is, I like it better, non compos mentis, which is kind of, I think, a legal term. Interestingly, I had no idea about this, the word lunatic means something else entirely. This meaning has been lost to time, I think. It used to mean anyone trying to determine longitude. Before they invented the marine chronometer, and it wasn't because people thought that they were crazy. I don't know. I think that it was because they used the method of lunar distance to determine longitude. And members of the Lunar Society of Birmingham called themselves lunatics. because of the using the moon. So then there's the whole werewolf in the full moon thing. It's not a real ancient thing. Not really, a little, but not really. The werewolf, is compelled by the energy of the full moon to grow hair and fangs and turn into a wolf. And this is actually the whole trope is a popular Hollywood invention. It was hinted at in Greek myth and in early European folklore taken from Greek myth, especially in France and Italy. They thought that there were shape-shifting curses that could be linked to the full moon, but not really specifically the whole every full moon a werewolf turns into a werewolf. The idea was popularized in 1943 with the movie Frankenstein Meets the Wolf Man. There's a lot of popular theory about the moon that because of the rotation and the orbiting, we only see one side of the moon ever. So all sorts of nonsense has arisen, pardon the pun, from that feature of the moon. That the back end of the moon is an alien base, that there's unverified rumors that the Apollo astronauts saw structures on the moon and were warned to stay away from them by ETs. Then there's the hollow moon theory, that you can knock on the moon and it echoes because it's metallic and hollow, that it's an artificial alien ship. But seismic data that you can look at, and I suppose you have to allow yourself to be somewhat credulous and believe that this is honest data. But lunar probes that have been sent to the moon have recorded this data, and they've proven that it has a dense crust, a mantle, and a solid core. Ingo Swann, famous remote viewer, he claims that at one point the ETs had a home planet that was destroyed about 30,000 years ago, and they ended up on the moon, and that they're in the process of migration. The fact that we're refocusing our space program on Mars and ignoring the moon simply supports all these theories and feeds them and encourages them. I'm not making a judgment one way or the other because I don't know. Perhaps we'll have to look into that. So the moon and hormones, this is interesting. Women are always blamed for their hormonal issues because, well, I can't say this as a joke because I'll get in trouble. Men have hormones too. 24% of younger women naturally, not with, they don't know this, they naturally sync their hormones with the full moon or the new moon, depends on the person. They think it's the light or the lack of light effects, and it causes your melatonin levels to change. And this has an effect on estrogen and progesterone, and I think that's an A, GARH. Well, nevertheless, it's a hormone. And this actually does have indirect effects on fertility, menses, menopause, and birth rates. Isn't that interesting? There are a lot of variables that interfere with our relationship with the moon: light pollution, the amount of sleep you get, your individual biology. So, we don't know what we don't know, but we're discovering every day interesting facts about our relationship with the moon. It has a powerful effect on us here on the earth. And this is in observance and celebration of the first man on the moon. So, and we're not even going to talk about cheese or the man in the moon, please. Okay. So that's it. And I hope you enjoyed that. Thank you very much for watching, and slanga foil. Slancha.